The red sun was setting over the fields of Harvest Moon when the alien ships arrived. Park Dong-woo stood in his cornfield, dirt under his fingernails and sweat on his brow, watching the massive vessels descend from the sky like dark clouds blocking out the stars. He had been farming this land for 30 years, just like his father before him, and he knew trouble when he saw it. The ships were enormous, made of black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They landed in a perfect formation around the colony's perimeter, crushing several acres of wheat fields in the process. Dong-woo felt his jaw tighten. Those fields had taken months to grow. "Papa, we need to go inside," his daughter Ji-woo called from the farmhouse porch. She was 26, brilliant, and had studied at the Mars Institute of Bioengineering before coming back home to help with the family farm. Dong-woo had always been proud of her, even when other farmers joked that education was wasted on someone who would just be growing vegetables. Inside the farmhouse, Dong-woo's wife Hye-jin was watching the news broadcast on their old screen. Director Tae-sung, the colony administrator, was speaking with a grim expression. Behind him stood Kang Soo-ho, the security chief who had once served in the Earth Defense Force before retiring to this quiet farming world. "The Vrin Empire has made contact," Tae-sung was saying. "They claim this sector of space belongs to them. They want us to evacuate within 30 days. Dong-woo sat down heavily in his chair. 30 days. Everything they had built, everything they had grown, gone in 30 days. The broadcast switched to show the alien commander. He called himself Rextal, and he looked like something from a nightmare. His face was angular and sharp, covered in dark scales that glistened under the lights. His eyes were yellow with black slits for pupils. When he spoke, his voice came through the translator as cold and mocking. "Humans," Rextal said, and the way he said it made it sound like an insult. "You are farmers, dirt scratchers, primitive creatures who play with plants while the galaxy advances around you. We need this world for military installations. You have 30 days to leave or you will be removed by force." The transmission ended. For a long moment, the farmhouse was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "They can't do this," Hye-jin said quietly. "This is our home." "They have warships," Ji-woo pointed out. "We have tractors and irrigation systems." Dong-woo stood up and walked to the window. Outside he could see his field stretching into the distance. Corn, wheat, the experimental crops that Ji-woo had been developing. This land had been nothing but dead rock when the first human settlers arrived. They had broken their backs to make it fertile, to make it live. And now some alien empire wanted to take it away because they saw farmers as easy targets. The next morning, Director Tae-sung called a colony meeting in the main hall. Over 300 people crowded inside, farmers and their families all looking worried and angry. Tae-sung stood at the front with Kang Soo-ho beside him. "I won't lie to you," Tae-sung said. "We're outgunned. The Vrin have enough firepower in orbit to level this entire colony in minutes. Earth Defense Force says they can't get reinforcements here in less than 3 months. The Council is recommending evacuation." "Evacuation?" someone shouted from the crowd. "Where are we supposed to go?" "There are other colonies that will take refugees," Tae-sung replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm not leaving," Dong-woo heard himself say. He stood up and people turned to look at him. "My family has worked this soil for 2 generations. My father is buried here. I won't abandon this land to some alien bullies who think farmers are weak." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Kang Soo-ho stepped forward. "I understand how you feel," the security chief said, "but we need to be realistic. I've seen what military empires can do. We don't have weapons. We don't have soldiers. We're farmers. Then maybe it's time we show them what farmers can do," Ji-woo said, standing up beside her father. All eyes turned to her. She looked nervous but determined. "I've been working on something. I didn't think much of it before, but now, I think it might help." That afternoon, Ji-woo took her father, Tae-sung, and Kang Soo-ho to the experimental greenhouses on the edge of the colony. Inside, the air was thick and humid, filled with the smell of growing things. But these plants didn't look like normal crops. "These are hybrid plants," Ji-woo explained, leading them down the rows. "I've been crossbreeding earth vegetables with local plant species, trying to create crops that grow better in Harvest Moon's environment." "They look aggressive," Kang Soo-ho observed. He was staring at a pumpkin plant whose vines seemed thicker and more muscular than normal. The leaves had sharp edges that looked almost like teeth. The radiation here is higher than on Earth, Jiwoo continued. And there are alien microbes in the soil. The plants have been adapting faster than I expected. Watch this. She took a small piece of meat from her pocket and held it near one of the pumpkin plants. Instantly, the vine moved. It wasn't the slow growth that plants normally did. This was fast, almost like an animal. The vine wrapped around the meat and pulled it close to the main stalk. Within seconds, the meat began to dissolve, absorbed by the plant. Dear God, Taesung whispered. It gets better, Jiwoo said. She moved to another section where cornstalks grew taller than a man. The leaves were dark green and razor sharp. These stalks are strong enough to cut through synthetic materials. And these? She pointed to what looked like kudzu vines growing along the greenhouse walls. These grow at 10 times the normal rate when exposed to certain chemical accelerants. Dongwoo felt a strange mixture of horror and hope rising in his chest. Can you control them? I think so, Jiwoo said. I've been developing chemical triggers. They respond to specific compounds. We could use the irrigation system to deploy them across the fields. This is insane, Kang Suho said, but he was smiling slightly. You want to weaponize vegetables? Why not? Jiwoo challenged. The Vrin think we're just simple farmers. Let them walk into our fields and see what we've grown. Over the next week, the colony transformed into something between a farm and a fortress. Jiwoo worked with Choi Min-seok, the colony botanist, to accelerate the plant modifications. They created faster-growing variants, more aggressive species, plants that could respond to commands delivered through the irrigation network. Dongwoo and the other farmers planted these new crops in specific patterns across the fields, creating what Kang Suho called kill zones. The security chief began training anyone who could hold a weapon, but everyone knew their real defense would be the plants. Ye-jin organized the families, making sure children and elderly were ready to evacuate to the underground storage facilities if fighting started. She didn't approve of what they were doing, but she understood it. This was their home, and they would defend it. On the 15th day, the Vrin sent another message. Commander Vrextal appeared on screens throughout the colony, his scaled face twisted in what might have been a smile. Humans, he said, we have been monitoring your pathetic preparations. We see you planting crops, digging ditches, playing soldier with farming tools. How amusing. We have changed our schedule. You now have 14 days, not 30. Use them to pack your belongings and prepare to leave. Or stay and be crushed like the insects you are. Your choice, dirt scratchers. That night, Dongwoo stood in his fields under the stars. The plants around him rustled in the breeze. But they felt different now. Dangerous. Alive in a way that normal crops weren't. He thought about his father, about all the generations of farmers in his family who had worked the soil and grown things from nothing. The Vrin thought farmers were weak. They thought growing things was simple work for simple people, but they didn't understand that farmers knew life and death more intimately than any soldier. They knew how to make things grow, and they knew how to make things end. Let them come, Dongwoo whispered to the wind. Let them walk into our fields and learn what earth can grow. Choi Min-seok had been a botanist for 40 years, and he had never seen plants behave like this. He stood in the greenhouse with Jiwoo, watching a vine wrap around a steel rod with enough force to bend the metal. The vine squeezed and squeezed until the rod snapped in half. This shouldn't be possible, Min-seok said, scribbling notes on his tablet. Plant cells don't have this kind of structural strength. The biology doesn't make sense. Nothing about this planet makes sense anymore, Jiwoo replied. She was tired. She had been working 18-hour days trying to understand what was happening to their crops. The radiation, the alien microbes, something is changing them at a genetic level. Min-seok pulled up files on his tablet and showed them to Jiwoo. Look at this. The cell walls have developed a crystalline structure I've never seen before. And the growth rate, it's like the plants are in a constant state of emergency response. They're adapting to threats in real time. Can we use that? Jiwoo asked. Can we make them see the Vrin as a threat? Maybe, Min-seok said slowly. But we'd need to understand the trigger mechanism better. What makes them respond aggressively versus passively? They spent the next 3 days running tests. They exposed the plants to different stimuli: heat, cold, chemicals, vibrations. They discovered that the plants responded most aggressively to certain frequencies of sound and to specific chemical compounds that resembled stress hormones. It's like they can smell fear, Jiwoo said in amazement. Or at least they can detect chemical signals that indicate danger. Li Yuna, the colony historian, came to the greenhouse on the 4th day. She was an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She carried an old data pad that looked like it had survived several planetary relocations. "I found something you need to see," Yuna said. She pulled up files that were marked with security classifications from decades ago. Project Green Wall. It was a military program during the resource wars back in 2089. Jiwoo and Min Seok leaned in to read. The files detailed experiments conducted by Earth military scientists who had tried to create biological weapons from modified plants. The project had been shut down after the plants became uncontrollable and consumed an entire research facility. "They were trying to do what we're doing," Min Seok said quietly. "They were trying to create weapons," Yuna corrected. "You're trying to create a defense. There's a difference. But you should know the risks. The project failed because they couldn't control what they made. The plants developed their own survival instincts." Jiwoo felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to the research facility?" "They had to burn it from orbit," Yuna said. "Nothing survived. The official report said it was an accident, but I've read the classified files. The plants killed 47 scientists before they could evacuate." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Director Tae-sung, who had been standing in the doorway listening, stepped inside. "Do we have another option?" he asked simply. They all knew the answer. They didn't. "Then we move forward," Tae-sung said. "But carefully. We need control mechanisms, fail-safes. We can't let this become another Project Green Wall." Han Jin-woo, the colony's hydroponics specialist, came up with a solution. He was a quiet man who usually kept to himself, but he understood the irrigation systems better than anyone. "We can use the water network as a delivery system," Jin-woo explained, showing them blueprints of the colony's underground pipes. "Each field section has independent valves. We can mix different chemical compounds into the water supply for each section. Growth accelerants in one area, inhibitors in another, aggressive triggers in a third. So we can activate specific sections of the fields as needed," Kang Soo-ho said, studying the blueprints. "Like deploying troops." "Exactly," Jin-woo confirmed. "And if things go wrong, we flood the entire system with herbicide. It won't kill the plants instantly, but it will slow them down enough for us to evacuate." "I hope it doesn't come to that," Hye-jin said. She had joined the planning sessions, taking notes and asking practical questions that the others sometimes overlooked. "We're talking about destroying our own crops, our own livelihood. Better than being destroyed ourselves," Dongwoo replied. His wife gave him a sad look, but she didn't disagree. The Vrin began their intimidation tactics on the 7th day. Small scouting parties landed in the outer fields and started destroying crops with plasma weapons. They burned acres of wheat and corn, laughing as they did it. The farmers watched helplessly from the colony, their life's work going up in smoke. Commander Vrextal broadcast a message after each attack. "This is what happens to those who defy the Vrin Empire. Your plants burn easily, humans. So will you." Kang Soo-ho organized a response. He took a team of 20 volunteers, farmers who had once been soldiers or security personnel, and they ambushed one of the scouting parties. It was a brief firefight in the ruined wheat fields. The humans used hunting rifles and improvised explosives. They killed 3 Vrin soldiers and damaged one of their vehicles before retreating. But they lost 2 people, young farmers who had families. The colony held a memorial service that night, and the mood turned from worried to grim. This was real. People were dying. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Kang Soo-ho told the planning committee. His arm was bandaged from a plasma burn. "The Vrin are testing us. When they realize we'll actually fight, they'll come in force." "How long do we have?" Tae-sung asked. "Days, maybe less." Jiwoo and Min Seok worked around the clock. They created what they called seed bombs, small capsules filled with modified plant seeds and growth accelerant. When triggered, these capsules would explode and scatter seeds across a wide area. Within minutes, the plants would sprout and grow to full size. They tested one in a sealed greenhouse. The explosion was relatively quiet, more of a pop than a bang, but what happened next was terrifying. Seeds scattered across the ground, and within 2 minutes, vines were erupting from the soil. They grew upward and outward, filling the greenhouse with a mass of green tendrils. A testing dummy was caught in the growth and quickly covered. The vines squeezed and pulled at it until the dummy broke apart. "Good God," Tae-sung whispered. "That's horrifying." "That's survival," Dongwoo said. He had seen the memorial service. He had seen the burned fields. His eyes were hard. The Vryn want to take our home. Let's show them what home means to us. Shinbora, the colony engineer, worked with Jinwoo to modify the irrigation system. They installed explosive charges at key junctions, not to destroy the system but to rapidly pressurize it. This would force the chemical accelerants through the pipes at high speed, triggering plant growth across multiple field sections simultaneously. It's a one-time thing, Bo-Ra warned. Once we blow these charges, the irrigation system will be damaged. We'll need weeks to repair it. If this doesn't work, we won't need to worry about repairs. Kang Soo-ho replied darkly. On the 12th day, Director Tae-sung made a final broadcast to the Vryn ships. He stood in front of the colony hall, flanked by Dongwoo and other farmers. Behind them, the fields stretched into the distance, looking peaceful and green. Commander Vrextal, Tae-sung said, speaking directly to the camera, "This is our final warning. Leave this world peacefully and no one else needs to die. We are farmers, yes, but we are also humans, and humans do not give up what is theirs without a fight. Walk away while you still can." The response came within an hour. Commander Vrextal appeared on every screen in the colony. He was laughing, his scaled face twisted with amusement. "Farmers threatening the Vryn Empire," he said between laughs. "This is the most entertaining thing I've seen in years." "Very well, dirt scratchers. You want to fight? We accept. Tomorrow we will send 500 soldiers to your little colony. They will march through your fields and take your homes, and you will learn the price of defiance." The transmission ended. The colony fell silent. Then slowly people began moving. Families said goodbyes. Fighters checked weapons. Engineers tested systems one last time. And in the fields, the modified plants waited, swaying gently in the evening breeze. That night, Jiwoo stood with her father on the farmhouse porch. The alien ships were visible in the sky, dark shapes against the stars. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked quietly. Dongwoo was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know if it's right, but it's all we have. Your mother and I, we came to this world with nothing. We made this farm from dirt and sweat and hope. If we lose it, we lose everything we are." "I'm scared, Papa." "So am I," Dongwoo admitted. "But being scared is okay. It means we're still human. The Vryn think we're weak because we grow things instead of destroying them. Tomorrow we teach them that the difference between growing and destroying is just a matter of purpose." In the greenhouses, the modified plants grew larger in the darkness. Their vines twisted and reached upward as if sensing what was coming. In the fields, millions of seeds waited in the soil, ready to sprout at a moment's notice. And in the colony, 300 farmers prepared to defend their home with the only weapons they truly understood: the patient, terrible power of growing things. The morning came too quickly. Dongwoo woke before sunrise and found he couldn't go back to sleep. He got up quietly, trying not to wake Hyejin, and went outside. The fields were covered in morning mist, making everything look soft and peaceful. It was hard to believe that today people would die here. Other farmers were already awake. He saw lights on in houses across the colony. People standing on porches, drinking coffee, looking out at their fields, waiting. Oh Dae-hyun found Dongwoo standing in the corn rows. Dae-hyun was only 22, the youngest farmer in the colony with his own land. He had always been the bold one, the risk-taker. Now he looked nervous but determined. "They're saying someone should test the crops before the Vryn arrive," Dae-hyun said. "Make sure everything works like it's supposed to." "That's dangerous," Dongwoo replied. "We've only done small tests." "Everything we're doing is dangerous," Dae-hyun pointed out. "But we need to know." "I volunteer." By the time the sun rose, a crowd had gathered at test field number 3. Kang Soo-ho had managed to capture a Vryn scout vehicle 2 days ago during the skirmishes. It sat in the middle of an empty field, its dark metal hull scarred with bullet marks. Jiwoo checked her equipment one more time. "The seed bombs are in place around the vehicle. The irrigation system for this section is ready. Once we activate it, the growth will be fast." "How fast?" Tae-sung asked. 2 to 3 minutes for full maturity," Min-seok answered. "Maybe less. We've never tested it at this scale." Dae-hyun climbed into a protective suit. It was the kind farmers used when handling dangerous chemicals. Not exactly military armor, but it was all they had. He walked out into the field toward the Vryn vehicle. "On my signal," Jiwoo said, her hand hovering over the control panel. Dae-hyun reached the vehicle and gave a thumbs up. Jiwoo pressed the button. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the ground began to tremble. The seed bombs detonated with soft popping sounds and seeds scattered across the field. The irrigation system activated, flooding the area with water mixed with growth accelerant. The seeds sprouted instantly. Shoots of green erupted from the soil, growing upward at a visible rate. Cornstalks shot up like spears reaching for the sky. Pumpkin vines spread across the ground like snakes, thick and muscular. Within 30 seconds, the field was covered in vegetation. The plants found the Vryn vehicle. Vines wrapped around its hull, squeezing. The pumpkin plants released their spores, and where the cloud touched the vehicle's metal, it began to smoke and dissolve. The corn stalks bent inward, their razor-sharp leaves scraping and cutting. Dae-hyun backed away slowly as the plants surged around him. The vegetation was so thick now that the vehicle was barely visible. There was a groaning sound of metal under stress, then a loud crack. The vehicle's hull split open, torn apart by the crushing force of the vines. "Get him out of there," Tae-sung ordered. Kang Soo-ho's team moved in with machetes, cutting a path through the plants to reach Dae-hyun. It took them 5 minutes to get him back to safety. By that time, the Vryn vehicle was completely destroyed, crushed and corroded into scrap metal. The watching farmers stood in stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. They had done it. They had actually created a weapon that could destroy Vryn technology. But Dongwoo didn't clap. He stared at the field, watching the plants continue to grow and spread. They showed no signs of stopping. "How do we turn it off?" he asked. Ji-woo looked worried. "The herbicide protocol. Jin-woo, activate it for Section 3. Jin-woo typed commands into his control pad. The irrigation system flushed herbicide into the field. The plant growth slowed, but it didn't stop immediately. It took another 10 minutes before the vegetation began to wither and die. 10 minutes, Kang Soo-ho said quietly. "If something goes wrong and we need to shut it down, we have a 10-minute delay." "A lot can happen in 10 minutes, Tae-sung observed. "But it's what we have. The Vryn will be here soon. Everyone to your positions." The Vryn army appeared on the horizon at noon. 500 soldiers marching in formation, their black armor gleaming in the sunlight. They had vehicles, weapons, and the confidence of a force that had never lost a battle against farmers. Commander Vrextal led from the rear in an armored transport. His voice boomed across the fields through loudspeakers. "Humans, this is your last chance. Surrender now or be destroyed." Director Tae-sung stood on the colony wall with a megaphone. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "This is your last chance, Commander. Leave peacefully. You don't know what you're walking into." Vrextal's laughter echoed across the fields. "We are walking through a farm, human. We will crush your vegetables under our boots, and then we will crush you. Forward!" The Vryn army advanced into the fields. They walked through the corn rows, their weapons ready, burning crops as they went. They were expecting resistance from the colonists, maybe some improvised traps or ambushes. They were not expecting the crops themselves to fight back. At first, nothing happened. The Vryn soldiers walked deeper into the fields, and some of them began to relax. "This is what they were afraid of?" one soldier joked. Walking through a garden? Kang Soo-ho watched from the colony wall through binoculars. He waited until the Vryn force was in the optimal position, spread out across 3 different field sections. Then he gave the signal. "Now," he said simply. Shin Bo-ra hit the detonator. Deep underground, charges exploded at key points in the irrigation system. Pressurized water mixed with growth accelerant flooded through the pipes at high speed. Within seconds, the chemical mixture was spraying up from hundreds of irrigation heads across the fields. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Seeds that had been planted in careful patterns erupted from the soil. Cornstalks shot upward, growing from tiny sprouts to full height in less than a minute. Pumpkin plants expanded across the ground in rolling waves of green. Kudzu vines exploded from the earth like reaching hands. The Vryn soldiers stopped in confusion. All around them, the fields were coming alive. Plants grew at an impossible rate, surrounding them, towering over them. "It's a trick," one Vryn officer shouted. "Burn them." The soldiers opened fire with their plasma weapons. They burned plants, cutting down corn stalks and setting vines on fire. But for every plant they destroyed, 10 more grew to take its place. The growth was too fast, too aggressive. Then the plants began to fight back. Kudzu vines wrapped around a soldier's leg and pulled. The soldier fell and more vines covered him, dragging him across the ground. His screams were cut short as the vines pulled him underground into the root systems that waited below. A pumpkin plant exploded near a group of soldiers. The spore cloud it released was acidic, eating through their armor's protective coating. They stumbled away, coughing and choking, only to run into cornstalks that bent and sliced with their razor-sharp leaves. "Fall back," the Vryn officer ordered. "Retreat to the—" A vine wrapped around his throat, cutting off his words. More vines pulled him down into the growing mass of vegetation. From the colony wall, the farmers watched in horror and fascination. What they had created was working, but it was also terrible to see. The Vryn soldiers were being hunted by plants, dragged down and consumed by things that should not be able to move or think or kill. "Dear God," Hee-Jin whispered. She stood next to Dongwu, clutching his arm. "What have we done?" "What we had to," Dongwu replied, but his voice was hollow. He had worked with plants his entire life. He had nurtured them, helped them grow, taken pride in feeding people with what he cultivated. Now he was watching those same skills used to kill. The Vryn army tried to regroup. They formed defensive circles, firing outward at the advancing plants. But the vegetation was everywhere now. It grew up through the ground beneath them, wrapped around their vehicles, pulled down their defensive barriers. Commander Vrextal watched the carnage from his transport. His expression had changed from mockery to shock to rage. "Impossible! They are plants. Just plants." But they were not just plants anymore. They were weapons, honed by evolution and human engineering into something new and deadly. The Vryn army was being torn apart, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. A group of about 50 Vryn soldiers managed to fight their way clear. They ran back toward their landing zone, cutting through vines and burning everything in their path. The plants pursued them, but these soldiers were fast and desperate. They made it out of the fields and scrambled aboard their transport ships. The ships lifted off quickly, leaving behind over 400 of their comrades. As they rose into the sky, those on board could see the fields below still churning with movement, still growing, still consuming. Commander Vrextal's transport was the last to leave. As it climbed toward orbit, he stared down at the green hell below. His army, his proud warriors, destroyed by farmers and their crops. The humiliation burned worse than any weapon. "This is not over," Vrextal growled. "Prepare the main fleet. We will burn these fields from orbit. We will turn this entire world into glass." But as his ship entered orbit, he saw something that made him pause. Other ships were arriving. Human ships. The Earth Defense Force had arrived early, drawn by the distress signals. They weren't enough to fight his entire fleet, but they were enough to complicate things. Commander Vrextal was not accustomed to humiliation. He paced the bridge of his flagship, his clawed hands clenching and unclenching. Behind him, his officers stood in nervous silence. They had all watched the battle. They had all seen their soldiers consumed by plants. "Status report," Vrextal demanded. 437 casualties, an officer reported quietly. 52 survivors. "The ground force is effectively destroyed, sir." Vrextal slammed his fist on a console. "Destroyed by farmers, by dirt scratchers with their weeds." He turned to his weapons officer. "Prepare orbital bombardment. I want those fields burned to ash. I want that colony erased from existence." "Sir," another officer interrupted nervously, "the human defense ships are hailing us. They say any attack on the colony will be considered an act of war against Earth." "They have 3 ships," Vrextal snarled. "We have 20. They're bluffing." "Perhaps, sir, but Earth has allies. If we start a war here—" Vrextal stared at the view screen, which showed the farming colony below. Those insignificant humans had made him look weak. They had cost him most of his ground force. But the officer was right. A full assault might trigger something larger than he wanted to deal with. "Fine," Vrextal said coldly. "We wait, let them think they've won. But prepare the fleet. When the time is right, we will finish this." Down on Harvest Moon, the situation was desperate in a different way. The modified plants had stopped their aggressive expansion, but just barely. The herbicide was working, but the root systems Jiwoo and Min-seok had created were more resilient than expected. "It's like they're resisting," Min-seok said, staring at his readings in disbelief. "The plants are adapting to the herbicide. Their biology is changing faster than we can poison them." Nam Jun-ki, the colony's mycologist, had been studying samples of the root systems. He was a quiet man who usually worked alone in his lab, but now he had information they desperately needed. "It's the fungal networks," Jun-ki explained, showing them microscope images. Underground, the plants have formed a relationship with alien fungi native to this world. The fungi connect all the root systems, letting them share resources and information. It's called a mycorrhizal network. On Earth, forests use something similar, but this is far more advanced. You're saying the plants are communicating? Jiwoo asked. In a way, yes. They're functioning as a single distributed organism. When one area is threatened, the others send resources to help. That's why the herbicide is taking so long to work. The healthy plants are keeping the poisoned ones alive. This revelation was both fascinating and terrifying. They hadn't just created a weapon. They had created something that could think, after a fashion, something that could adapt and survive. The celebration of their victory was brief. That night, as people tended to the few injuries they had suffered, alarms blared across the colony. The Vryn were coming back, not with 500 soldiers, but with 5,000. They've committed their entire ground force, Kang Suho reported grimly, watching the scanners. Every soldier on every ship. They're not playing around anymore. Director Tae-sung called an emergency meeting. His face was haggard. In the past days, he had aged years. Can we do it again? Can the plants stop this many? I don't know, Jiwoo admitted. We've already used most of our seed bombs and growth accelerant. We can activate the remaining fields, but what? Dongwoo asked. His wife Heejin sat beside him and he held her hand tightly. But I don't know if we can control it this time, Jiwoo finished. The plants are already more aggressive than we designed them to be. If we trigger another growth surge with this many targets, with this much stimulation, they might not stop at the Vryn. Minseok finished for her. They might keep growing. They might attack us too. The room fell silent. Outside through the windows they could see the Vryn army gathering on the horizon. Thousands of soldiers with vehicles, heavy weapons, and flamethrowers designed specifically to deal with the plant threat. Yijin spoke up, her voice soft but clear. Then we evacuate the colony. We trigger the plants and we run. We save our lives even if we lose our homes. No, Dongwoo said firmly. The Earth Defense Force ships are here. They're buying us time. If we run now, we lose everything. We stand and fight. With what? Someone shouted from the back. Plants we can't control? With exactly that, Dongwoo replied, standing up. The Vryn are coming here to kill us. The plants might be dangerous, but they're our danger. They're Earth's danger. And I'd rather take my chances with something we grew than with something that wants to murder us. There was murmuring, but slowly, heads began to nodding. These were farmers. They understood taking risks on things they'd planted, hoping they would grow right. The Vryn attack began at dawn. This time, they had learned from their mistakes. They advanced slowly, burning fields ahead of them with flamethrowers. Behind the fire teams came soldiers with energy shields, and behind them, heavy vehicles with mounted weapons. Commander Vrextal's voice boomed across the landscape. You cannot hide behind your plants this time, humans. We have adapted. We will burn everything you have grown, and then we will burn you. The first fields ignited. Corn stalks burned quickly, sending up columns of black smoke. The Vryn soldiers advanced methodically, destroying everything in their path. They're in position, Kang Suho reported. About half the army is in the Central Valley. That's where we placed most of the remaining seed bombs. Dongwoo stood on the colony wall with Tae-sung. Behind them, transport vehicles were loaded with children and elderly, ready to evacuate if things went wrong. Heejin was helping organize the evacuation, her face set in determined lines. Do it, Tae-sung ordered. Activate everything. All fields, all sections. We're all in. Park Jiwoo's hands shook as she entered the activation codes. This was it. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked. She thought about her mother, organizing the evacuation. She thought about her father, standing firm. She thought about all the farmers who had trusted them. She pressed the final button. Deep underground, every remaining charge detonated simultaneously. The entire irrigation network, spanning miles of farmland, flooded with growth accelerant at maximum concentration. The effect was like nothing they had seen before. The ground itself seemed to come alive. Across hundreds of acres, plants erupted from the soil like an explosion. But it wasn't just the fields they had planted. The growth accelerant was so concentrated, so powerful, that it triggered germination in every seed, every root, every dormant plant across the entire valley. Corn, wheat, pumpkins, kudzu, they all grew at once, mixing together, creating a wall of living vegetation that rose up like a green tsunami. The Vryn soldiers who had been confidently burning crops suddenly found themselves surrounded by growth that dwarfed their flames. A Vryn soldier screamed as kudzu vines, as thick as tree trunks, burst from the ground beneath him. The vines wrapped around his legs, his waist, his arms, and pulled him down. His flamethrower fired wildly as he disappeared into the earth, setting nearby plants ablaze, but the fire couldn't spread. New growth smothered the flames instantly. The heavy vehicles tried to retreat, but root systems surged up through the ground, wrapping around their treads, lifting them off the earth. Cornstalks grew so tall they blocked out the sun, their razor-sharp leaves slicing through armor and flesh alike. Pumpkin plants mutated into something monstrous, grew to the size of houses. They released spore clouds that corroded everything they touched. Vryn shields flickered and died as the acid ate through their generators. "It's working," Kang Suho said in amazement. "It's actually working." But something was wrong. Jiwoo could see it in her monitors. The growth wasn't stopping at the Vryn positions. It was spreading outward in all directions, including toward the colony. "The root networks," Min Seok said urgently. "They're connecting everything. The plants are feeding off each other's energy. This isn't a controlled response anymore. This is a cascade. Shut it down," Taesung ordered. "Herbicide now." Jinwoo activated the kill switch, flooding the system with poison. But the plants didn't slow down. If anything, they seemed to grow faster, as if sensing the threat and responding with even more aggressive expansion. "The fungal network," Junki said, his face pale. "It's helping them resist. They're sharing resources too efficiently. The herbicide can't kill them fast enough." In the valley, the Vryn army was being systematically destroyed. Soldiers tried to run, but the plants were everywhere. Strangler fig variants that Jiwoo had created wrapped around entire squads, crushing them. Giant pitcher plants, modified from Earth species, opened their maws and swallowed soldiers whole. Commander Vrextal watched from orbit in horror. His army, his proud warriors, were being consumed by a living green nightmare. Half his force was already gone. The survivors were trapped in a shrinking circle, fighting desperately against vegetation that seemed endless. "Orbital strike," Vrextal ordered. "Burn them all, burn everything." But before his ships could fire, the Earth Defense Force vessels moved into position, their weapons locked on the Vryn fleet. The human commander sent a tight beam message: "Fire on that colony and we fire on you. Back down." Vrextal had a choice: risk war with Earth over a farming colony or retreat. 3 days after the evacuation, Jiwoo stood in the observation deck of the Earth Defense Force ship Horizon, staring down at Harvest Moon. The green tide had finally stopped growing. The herbicide, combined with the planet's natural environmental limits, had eventually slowed the plants down. But the damage was done. The entire Central Valley was covered in dense vegetation. The colony was gone, swallowed by the very weapon they had created. Director Taesung joined her at the window. He looked tired, older than his 50 years. "The Earth government is sending a containment team. Scientists, military specialists. They want to study what happened down there." "Study it?" Jiwoo said bitterly. "We created a monster. We lost our home. What more is there to study? How to make sure it never happens again," Taesung replied quietly. "And how to make sure other colonies don't need to do what we did." The Vryn fleet was gone. Only a handful of their soldiers had survived the battle, rescued by orbital extraction before the plants could finish them. Commander Vrextal had withdrawn his entire fleet from the sector, too humiliated to even file an official report. But news of the battle had spread. Across the galaxy, species were talking about what happened on Harvest Moon. Humans, the farmers, the peaceful settlers, had destroyed an entire Vryn ground force using plants. The story sounded impossible, like something from a horror tale. But it was true, and everyone knew it. Kang Suho was coordinating with the Earth Defense Force Command, trying to help the colony refugees find temporary housing. He found Dongwoo sitting alone in one of the refugee quarters, staring at nothing. "There's a transport leaving for the Mars Agricultural Station tomorrow," Suho said gently. "They're offering land to displaced farmers. Good land, already prepared." Dongwoo nodded but didn't respond. His hands, weathered from decades of farm work, lay idle in his lap. Hands that had planted and harvested, that had nurtured life from soil. Hands that had helped create a weapon. Heejin found him there an hour later. She sat beside him and took his hand. They didn't speak for a long time. Outside the window, stars drifted by slowly. "I killed her," Dongwoo finally said. "The woman I married, the woman who loved our farm. I killed that part of her and I killed that part of me. We're still alive, Hyejin replied. Our daughter is alive. Our friends survived. We lost our home, but we kept our lives. That's not nothing. But at what cost? Dongwu asked. What did we become down there? Hyejin didn't have an answer for that. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 4 weeks after the battle. The council chamber on Concordia Station was a massive dome where representatives from 100 species gathered to discuss matters of interstellar law. Ji Woo had been summoned to testify. She stood in the center of the chamber, feeling very small, while thousands of alien eyes watched her from the surrounding tiers. Ambassador Yu Sang-woo from Earth stood beside her, looking uncomfortable in his formal diplomatic attire. The council chancellor, a being called Rixena from a species that looked like walking crystals, spoke first. Park Ji-woo of Earth, you are here to answer questions about the incident on Harvest Moon. The Vrin Empire has filed a formal complaint, claiming humans deployed illegal biological weapons. Ji-woo felt her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. The Vrin invaded our colony. They gave us 30 days to abandon our homes. We defended ourselves with the only resources we had. A Vrin representative stood up, hissing angrily. You created monsters, abominations that consumed thousands of our soldiers. This was not defense, this was biological warfare. You brought 5,000 soldiers to attack 300 farmers. Ji-woo shot back. You brought weapons designed to kill. We brought plants designed to grow. The fact that our plants could defend themselves was an accident of evolution, not a planned attack. Accident, the Vrin representative shouted. You admitted to modifying these plants. You engineered them deliberately. Ambassador Sang-woo stepped forward. If I may, Council, the plants in question were agricultural experiments, designed to improve crop yields in harsh environments. Their defensive capabilities were an unexpected result of genetic adaptation to local conditions. Earth did not create a weapon. Earth created farmers who got very, very good at growing things. Murmuring spread through the chamber. Some species seemed sympathetic. Others looked worried. A few looked terrified. Chancellor Rixena raised a crystalline hand for silence. We will hear expert testimony. Dr. Min-seok Choi, please come forward. Min-seok, who had also been brought to Concordia, presented his findings. He showed genetic analyses, growth data, everything they had learned about the modified crops. He explained how the plants had adapted naturally to Harvest Moon's environment, and how the colonists had simply accelerated processes that were already happening. These plants are not weapons in the traditional sense, Min-seok concluded. They are living organisms responding to threats in their environment. The Vrin army represented a massive threat. The plants responded accordingly, but can you control them? A council member asked. Can you guarantee these plants will not spread to other worlds and cause damage there? Min-seok hesitated. No, I cannot guarantee that. The plants on Harvest Moon have been contained for now, but their biology is still changing. They might adapt further. They might develop new capabilities. This is the nature of life. It evolves. The chamber erupted in worried discussion. This was what many species feared most about humans. Not their weapons, not their aggression, but their unpredictability. Their ability to change the rules of the game. Ji-woo listened to the debates for hours. Species argued about whether humans should be restricted, monitored, or banned from certain types of agricultural research. The Vrin demanded reparations and punishment. Others defended Earth's right to self-defense. Finally, Ji-woo could not stay silent anymore. May I speak? She asked loudly. Chancellor Rixena looked surprised but nodded. You may. Ji-woo walked to the center of the chamber again. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but she had something to say. All of you are afraid, she began. You're afraid because farmers defeated soldiers, because plants destroyed an army, because something you thought was weak turned out to be strong. I understand that fear. I'm afraid too. I'm afraid of what we created. I'm afraid of what we lost. I'm afraid of what we became in order to survive. She paused, looking around at the alien faces watching her. But you need to understand something about humans. We don't want to be warriors. We don't want to create weapons. We want to grow things. We want to nurture life, not destroy it. The Vrin forced us to make a choice between dying or fighting with the only tools we had. We chose to fight. And yes, we're very good at it when we have to be. Is that a threat? The Vrin representative demanded. No, Ji-woo said firmly. It's a fact. Humans have been farmers for 10,000 years. We know soil and seeds and growing seasons. We know how to make life flourish in hostile environments. We know patience and we know persistence. These skills, they can nurture or they can destroy. The choice of which one we use depends on how we're treated. She took a breath. The Vryn saw farmers and thought we were weak. They mocked us. They called us dirt scratchers. They tried to take our home. And they learned that people who know how to grow life also know how to weaponize it if they must. Every species in this chamber should remember that lesson. Not because we want to threaten anyone, but because underestimating others is how conflicts start. The chamber was silent. Then Chancellor Rixina spoke. Your words are noted, Park Ji-woo. The council will deliberate and issue a ruling. The deliberations took 3 days. In that time, Ji-woo stayed in a small apartment on Concordia Station with her parents and other colony representatives. They watched news broadcasts showing footage of Harvest Moon, of the green valley that had once been their home. Scientists in protective suits were beginning to study the plants, trying to understand them. When the council's decision came, it was more balanced than Ji-woo had feared. The ruling stated that Earth had acted in legitimate self-defense. The Vryn Empire was sanctioned for aggressive expansion and ordered to pay reparations to the displaced colonists. However, Earth was also required to implement strict controls on agricultural bioweapon research and to work with galactic oversight teams. Harvest Moon was declared a quarantine zone. No one could land there until the plant situation was fully understood and contained. The colonists were granted legal ownership of the world, but they could not return until it was safe. It's a compromise, Ambassador Sang-woo explained to the gathered colonists. Not perfect, but better than we might have gotten. You're heroes to Earth, villains to some alien species, and mysteries to others. The galaxy won't soon forget what happened there. 6 months later, Park Dong-woo stood in a new field on a different world. The Earth government had granted the Harvest Moon colonists a generous settlement package and prime farming land on a planet called New Eden. The soil here was good, the climate stable. It would never be home, not really, but it was a start. Hae-jin worked beside him, planting ordinary corn seeds, normal seeds that would grow into normal crops, the kind they had grown before everything changed. There was something therapeutic about it returning.